They said she was cursed. That's all it took. No trial, no proof, just a look between her father and eldest brother before they shoved her from the moving wagon. Nora didn't scream. She landed hard, her shoulder scraping against the stones, the breath knocked clean out of her chest. Dust clouded her face as the family wagon rattled on, disappearing into the dry horizon like it had never carried her at all. One of the horses whinnied, a sound of hesitation, maybe even regret, but no one looked back. She crawled to her knees, clutching her ribs, blood running down her palm from a gash she couldn't even feel yet. Her dress was torn, her bonnet lost somewhere in the dirt, and her voice silent. Not by choice, but by survival. They'd always said she was too quiet, too strange, too still. After her mother died and the fever came for the baby, they looked to Nora for someone to blame. "She don't cry like normal girls," her aunt once whispered. "Eyes too cold, hands too steady." So they made her the reason the crops failed, the reason animals were born wrong, the reason her brother fell off his horse. Now, left in the wasteland, she was supposed to die like a ghost, unnoticed, unclaimed. But the desert didn't kill her that night. The buzzards circled. The sun baked her skin. She tried to walk, but her ankle swelled with every step, and her vision blurred until the rocks looked like snakes and the sky pulsed with fire. She collapsed near a dried-out well, her body trembling, her mouth cracked open in silent pleading. That's where he found her, just before dusk. On a stallion, black as coal, with silver buckles shining from his vest like coins tossed at fate. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what she'd done. He just dismounted, knelt beside her, and touched her forehead with the back of his glove. "You're burnin' up," he said quietly, more to himself than her. "But not gone yet." She blinked up at him, unsure if he was real. "My name's Colt Maddox," he added. "I own every inch of land from here to El Paso, and I say you ain't dying today." He lifted her with a strength she didn't know existed, and in that moment, Nora knew. Death had passed her by, but something else had arrived. The ride to Colt Maddox's ranch was a blur of heat, hooves, and heartbeat. Nora faded in and out of consciousness, sometimes feeling the sway of the saddle, sometimes only the steady rhythm of Colt's voice muttering things she didn't understand. Words meant to anchor her. When she woke again, it was to the sound of a door creaking open and boots on hardwood. The air inside the ranch house was cool, shaded, thick with the scent of leather and cedar. Colt laid her down on a clean bed in a side room and called out, "Clara!" A woman appeared moments later, older, sharp-eyed, with sleeves rolled high and no time for nonsense. "Is she dead?" "Not yet," Colt said simply. Clara scowled but moved quickly, wetting a cloth, slicing Nora's dress away from the wounds, murmuring things like, "Lord have mercy," and "What kind of animal leaves a girl like this?" Nora wanted to answer, wanted to scream the truth, but her throat was raw and her voice stayed buried. For 3 days, she drifted in fever, whispering things only she heard. Colt didn't leave. Not once. He sat in the corner of the room at night, hat tilted low, a rifle across his lap. He didn't touch her, didn't talk unless she opened her eyes. But he stayed. On the 4th day, when the fever broke, Clara pressed a tin cup to her lips. "Drink, girl. It's just broth. You're safe now, but don't expect soft beds and lullabies. The Maddox Ranch isn't a church. It's a business, and we don't carry passengers unless they pull their weight." Nora drank, then rasped, "Why'd he bring me here?" Clara paused, then shrugged. "Ask him yourself. He hasn't answered me either." Later that evening, when the light turned golden through the shutters, Colt finally spoke. "They left you for dead." It wasn't a question. Nora nodded. "Family?" She hesitated, then nodded again. "Then they were never yours to begin with," he said, quiet but firm. "You don't owe them your breath, but you do owe yourself a future." Nora looked at him, her lips trembling around the first word she'd spoken to him since he saved her. "Why?" "Me?" Colt studied her, then said something she wouldn't forget for the rest of her life. "Because I've seen broken things made new, and you looked like someone worth the trouble." Nora didn't sleep in the house after the first week. Not because Colt asked her to leave, but because the barn felt safer. Its walls were high, its air honest, filled with the scent of hay and sweat instead of questions. She chose the loft, tucked in beside the grain sacks, where light filtered in through knotholes like stars that couldn't lie. Colt let her be. Every morning she found bread and beans in a tin pail beside the stall door, with fresh water and a note that said nothing more than, "Eat." She obeyed because the food felt more like care than orders. During the day, she cleaned tack, oiled saddles, swept the stalls. She didn't speak much, but her hands remembered the language of work. The ranch hands watched her, whispered some. "That the cursed one? Colt's taken in strays before, but this is different. She don't talk. That's the part that's off." But no one dared touch her, not with the way Colt rode in at dusk and looked around like a man counting shadows. One evening, while brushing the roan mare in stall 3, Nora heard something she hadn't in weeks. Crying. Not hers. High, muffled sobs. She followed the sound past the feed bins, to the far end of the barn where the boards gapped slightly, revealing a space she hadn't noticed before. A little girl sat there, knees pulled to her chest, face streaked with tears. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her dark curls were tangled, her dress stained with dirt. She froze when she saw Nora. Nora knelt slowly, not speaking, just watching her like she might a spooked colt. After a long moment, the girl whispered, "You ain't gonna tell him, are you?" Nora shook her head. "Mama used to hide me here too, before she got sick." Nora's voice cracked when she finally used it. "What's your name?" The girl blinked. "Juny, what's yours?" "Nora." They sat in silence, 2 secrets tucked in straw. Later that night, Colt appeared in the barn doorway, his eyes scanning the dark. "You seen Juny?" Nora stepped forward and simply said, "She's safe." Colt stared at her, hard, but then nodded once and turned away. Something shifted then. Not between Nora and the child. Between Nora and the ranch. She wasn't just healing. She was beginning to belong. The wind came hard that week, snapping fence boards like brittle twigs and driving dust through every crack in the bunkhouse. Colt worked sunrise to sundown alongside the ranch hands, sleeves rolled, hands calloused, never asking more than he gave. Nora worked too. She followed the fence line with a hammer tucked in her belt, and Juny beside her, barefoot and fearless, chattering about rabbits and saints. They patched what they could, tied loose wire, lifted fallen rails. It was during one of those walks that Nora spotted something strange, half buried in the dirt near the south post, beneath a stack of sun-bleached stones. A Bible. Its leather was cracked, the pages curled from rain, but there was no mistaking the gold lettering pressed into its cover. It didn't belong to Colt. She opened it carefully, and inside the front page was a name scratched in with unsteady ink, Lila Maddox. And below it, in a different hand, 2 words, "Forgive me." Nora stared at it a long time before wrapping it in cloth and hiding it beneath her shawl. That night, after Juny had fallen asleep curled against her in the loft, Nora climbed down and walked toward the house. Colt was outside, mending the porch rail by lantern light. He glanced up when she stepped into the glow, his brow raised in quiet question. Wordlessly, Nora handed him the bundle. When he unwrapped it, something shifted in his jaw. Not surprise, recognition. "Where'd you find this?" he asked, voice low. "Fence line," she said. "South End." Colt nodded, slow and heavy, and then said something that sounded more like memory than speech. "My wife used to read that out loud, every night, even after she got sick." Nora's breath caught. "Juny's." "Her daughter," Colt confirmed. "Not mine by blood, but in every way that matters." He closed the Bible and held it to his chest, like it still had heat. "She didn't leave. I buried her on the hill when the fever took her, but I couldn't stand to keep this inside." He looked at Nora then, not just seeing her, but understanding her. "Guess we both carry things we don't speak of." Nora didn't answer. She just sat beside him on the steps, both of them silent as the wind softened. That night, the porch light stayed lit till dawn. Sunday came with no church bells, just the rustle of cottonwood leaves and the scent of bread rising in the kitchen. The ranch had its own kind of service. No pews, no sermons, just a long table set beneath the oaks, where hands rough from work folded before meals, and silence held more reverence than hymns. Nora stood beside Colt at that table for the first time. Juny clung to her skirts, and every man who approached removed his hat before speaking. No one said why, but Nora knew. She wasn't the same ghost they'd whispered about weeks before. She'd stitched her name into the fabric of the place, through sweat, through quiet, through simply staying when no one expected her to. Still, there were eyes that lingered too long. Among the ranch hands, a man named Corbin had a look she didn't trust. Oily grin, eyes too narrow. He leaned close when speaking, stood too near when passing, but Colt's presence kept his hands at bay. After the meal, Clara pulled Nora aside, wiping her floury hands on her apron. "Colt don't talk about it, but he's not just the richest man in these parts. He's the most watched. Folks wait for him to fall, to slip, to prove that fortune can't buy soul. And now he's gone and brought you in, so every move you make will echo louder than it should." Nora met Clara's eyes. "Why does he care?" "Because you didn't ask for anything," Clara said simply. "And that's rarer than gold." That afternoon, Juny brought Nora to the grave beneath the cottonwood tree. A single stone, smooth and flat, marked with Lila's name in carved script. Juny placed a wildflower beside it and whispered, "Mama would have liked you." Nora's chest tightened. She knelt beside the child and traced the carved letters with her fingers, wondering what it meant to fill the space someone else left behind, and whether healing meant replacing or becoming something new. Behind her, Colt stood at a respectful distance, hands in his pockets. "We never buried her with a sermon," he said. "She didn't want one." "What did she want?" Nora asked softly. Colt answered without hesitation. "Peace." And as the wind stirred the branches above them, Nora realized she was closer to that than she'd ever been. Not because of pity, but because someone had made space for her pain without trying to name it. The ranch woke quiet that morning. Too quiet. Birds sang, horses shuffled in the paddocks, but Clara's kitchen stayed cold, and Juny's voice, usually the first sound Nora heard, was missing. At first, Nora thought the girl had slipped out to chase jackrabbits or feed the hens. But by the time breakfast sat untouched and the sun cleared the ridge, panic was already sinking claws into her chest. "She's not in the barn," Nora told Colt, her voice trembling. "Not with the goats. Not anywhere I've seen." Colt's face changed in an instant. Calm turned to steel. "Check the creek. I'll ride the ridge." Ranch hands scattered like hornets, saddling horses, calling her name into the wind. Clara paced the porch, muttering prayers, her apron twisted in her fists. Nora ran barefoot through thorn and dust, her skirts soaked with morning dew, her breath sharp with fear. Every step screamed with the memory of abandonment, of being left and forgotten. And now, Juny? Number not again? Not her. Hours passed with no sign. Then, just past the dry ravine, Nora found it, a scrap of fabric caught on a mesquite branch, blue with red stitching, the hem of Juny's dress. Beside it, small footprints in the dirt, leading toward a narrow animal trail. Nora followed, heart thundering, whispering the child's name like a prayer stitched into the air. Juny, Juny, it's me. Around the bend, she finally saw her, curled in a hollow between two rocks, arms around her knees, eyes wide and dry with terror. Juny! Nora dropped to her knees, scooping the girl into her arms. But Juny didn't speak. She just held on tight, as if sound itself had betrayed her. Colt arrived moments later, reins loose in his fist, eyes wild until they locked on Juny. Then he dismounted without a word, dropped to his knees, and wrapped them both in his arms. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're safe." Back at the ranch, Clara gave the child tea, while Nora stayed by her side, brushing her hair, humming without melody. Just rhythm, just presence. That night, Colt stood in the doorway of the barn where Nora sat with Juny on her lap. "Thank you," he said quietly. "She trusts you. That means something." Nora looked down at the girl's sleeping face and whispered back, "She's the first person who made me feel real." Colt nodded, then said, "You're more than real, Nora. You're family now." It was the first time Nora saw Colt without his gun belt. The sun had just slipped behind the hills, leaving the sky smeared in gold and violet, and Colt stood by the water pump, shirt damp with sweat, hands braced on his knees. He looked like a man trying to put down something heavier than metal. "You ever get tired of being the one that fixes everything?" Nora asked from the porch, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. Colt straightened, glanced her way, then slowly walked over, his spurs quiet in the grass. "All the time," he said. "But folks don't come to me for weakness." Nora studied him. This man who had built a kingdom of fences and fearlessness, yet never let anyone see what he carried. "Then let me ask you something no one else does," she said. "What did you lose?" He sat on the step beside her, slower than usual, like the truth had weight. "My brother," he said. "Before Lila. Before the money. He was 12. Fell through ice I should have checked. I never told anyone that. Never even said his name after." He ran a hand over his face. "And I lost Lila to fever. I thought I could bargain with God. Told him I'd give up half my land, my strength, everything. But she died anyway. And I stopped talking to anyone who wore a collar after that." Nora reached for his hand without thinking. She didn't speak, didn't offer comfort he hadn't asked for. She just held it, and Colt let her. "You ever miss the version of yourself from before all the pain?" he asked after a while. "She didn't get to live long," Nora answered, "but sometimes I think she's still in there, just waiting for me to open the door again." Colt looked at her with something soft and raw. "Then maybe we leave the doors open. Even just a little." He stood, reaching into his vest, pulling out a small wooden carving, the shape of a horse, delicate and unfinished. "Juny made this, said it reminded her of you." He placed it in Nora's palm. "I think she sees something in you I've been trying to name." And with that, he walked off into the dark, leaving his gun belt behind on the porch rail, proof that some armor didn't need to be worn forever. The wagon creaked like a memory. Same cracked wheels, same chipped paint. Only this time, It didn't carry Nora. It brought ghosts. Her father sat at the reins, older but no grayer, still wearing the same brimmed hat that had shadowed his cold eyes when he cast her out. Beside him, her brother Nathan looked thinner, angrier, like life hadn't gone the way he expected. They pulled into the Maddox yard without warning, dust rising like a warning from the past. Nora stood on the porch, frozen. Colt stepped out beside her, his posture calm but unreadable. "Visitors?" he asked softly. "Uninvited," she whispered. Her father climbed down first, eyes scanning the ranch like he was appraising it, not visiting. "You look well fed," he said, voice flat. "Better than we figured, seeing as you were meant to be buried by now." Nathan said nothing, just spat into the dirt. Colt stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You've got 2 minutes to explain what you want before you're turned around and sent packing." Her father squinted. "This your land?" "All of it," Colt replied. "And she's under my roof." Nathan finally spoke. "We lost the crop. Mama's gone. We need help." He looked directly at Nora then. "We didn't come to fight. We came to ask." Nora felt the ache of old wounds split open, but not bleed. "You left me to die," she said. "For nothing." Her father shifted. "We thought you were touched. Damned. You always brought trouble." "I survived," she said. "And I found a place where I'm not cursed, just seen." Colt didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to hold the air tight with warning. Her father looked down, shame flickering across his face, though whether it was real or just strategy, Nora couldn't tell. "Your family," he said. "That still means something." "No," she said clearly. "It doesn't. Family doesn't throw you out and come back when they're hungry." She turned to Colt, and he nodded once, giving her all the power she needed. "There's no help here for you," she told them. "Not from me." They left with silence trailing behind them like smoke, and as the wagon vanished down the trail, Colt touched Nora's shoulder gently. "Proud of you," he said. "Not for sending them off, for staying true to the girl who deserved better." And for the first time, Nora believed him. Winter came soft that year. No bitter frost, no hard winds, just quiet evenings and the scent of firewood on every breeze. Nora spent her nights in the parlor now, no longer hiding in barns or silence. Juny sat at her feet threading beads, and Colt carved beside the hearth, his hands never idle. One evening, Clara brought out a box wrapped in faded red cloth. Inside were scraps, bits of old shirts, dress hems, a worn apron string. "Lila kept these," Clara said. "Said one day she'd make a memory quilt, never got the chance." She looked at Nora, then set the box in her lap. "Maybe you should finish it." Nora's hands trembled as she sorted the pieces, each one a story, a breath someone once lived. She chose carefully. A square from Lila's shawl, a corner of Colt's childhood bandana he'd quietly slipped in, even one of Juny's outgrown smocks. She stitched at night, slow and steady, each thread pulling something deeper together. One square, though, remained untouched, a piece of the blue dress she'd worn the day her family left her in the dirt. It sat folded on the table, until Colt finally asked, "Why not add it?" Nora touched it gently. "Because it still feels like a wound." Colt looked at her, then said, "Then maybe it belongs at the center." That night, with Juny asleep and the fire low, Nora stitched the blue square into the middle of the quilt, not to glorify pain, but to anchor everything that came after. Around it, she wove symbols: warmth, safety, belonging. A map of survival, stitched by the hands that had once trembled just to be seen. When she showed Colt the finished quilt, he ran his fingers over it slowly. You didn't just finish hers, he said. You made it yours. She smiled. Ours. He paused, then pulled something from his pocket. A ring, simple but carved with a wildflower. Don't need a preacher, don't need papers, just need you to say yes. Nora didn't hesitate. Yes. He slipped it onto her finger as gently as someone placing light in the dark. And as they wrapped the quilt around their shoulders, Colt whispered, This is what home was always supposed to mean. And Nora, resting her head on his shoulder, whispered back, Not survival. Life. By spring, the porch had become more than wood and nails. It was a gathering place, a memory, a promise. Nora sat there most mornings, wrapped in the quilt she'd finished by hand, her fingers tracing its seams like they were the lines of her own story. Juny played in the tall grass nearby, laughing without fear, her braids bouncing, her voice free. And Colt? He built a new swing for the front oak, sanded it smooth, hung it with rope thick enough to hold two. He said it was for Juny. But everyone knew he meant Nora, too. The townsfolk had started coming by more often. Clara's cousins, a widower with his sons, even the pastor who'd once called Colt a heathen. They came not because of the wealth, but because of the peace. The ranch had changed. Not in size, but in soul. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to Miss Nora Maddox. She turned it over in her hands, stunned by the name. It was from a neighbor to the north, asking if she'd be willing to speak to a group of young women, girls who had been cast out, like her, girls who thought silence was safer than standing up. Nora folded the letter slowly and set it aside. She wasn't ready to speak publicly. Not yet. But one day she would. For now she spoke in the way she lived, in every stitch, in every glance she gave Juny that said, "You are not alone," and in every time she took Colt's hand without hesitation. That night, Colt joined her on the porch, their hands brushing as they watched the last of the sun bleed behind the hills. "You remember that day I found you?" he asked. "I thought I was dreaming," Nora said with a smile. "So did I," he whispered. "But it was the first time I believed in second chances again." Juny climbed onto Nora's lap, her breath warm, her eyes fluttering closed. "You saved me," she mumbled. Nora kissed her forehead. "You saved me first." And as the lantern flickered and the prairie hushed, the three of them sat wrapped in a silence that needed no explanation. Only gratitude. The porch faced east, always had. And now, as the first stars blinked awake above the ranch, Nora knew the truth. Her life didn't just begin when she was left behind. It began when someone saw her worth and stayed. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to help Echoes of the West grow. What would you have done if you had seen her that day? Let us know in the comments.